I think it's a really common assumption that there is well-organized, well-funded opposition. There's not, is the truth. You might have an American Psychiatric Association submit a letter, but they're not organizing, they're not raising money, they're not going out of their way to try and stop this train that, in my opinion, can't be stopped. Like, the cat is out of the bag on psychedelics. It's just how far out can it run and will it grow up and have a good life?
We're sitting down with Sam Chapman, the executive director of the Center for Psychedelic Policy, and Sam is really steeped in, well, the world of psychedelic policy, and is here at Psychedelic Science talking about the landscape of psychedelics and psychedelic law and policy around the country, and can really help us understand what people face in different states when they try to access psilocybin. From there, I'll let you tell us really what you do and what really is going on out there, Sam. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me. So I've been involved in progressive drug policy reform my entire adult life. The recent psychedelic chapter started about 5 years ago when I had the pleasure and opportunity to be the campaign manager for Measure 109, which was the first ever state-led ballot initiative to license and regulate psilocybin therapy at the state level. And so as the campaign manager, we went through many hurdles to pass that ballot measure, from having to collect signatures in the middle of COVID and having to rewrite the entire playbook, all the way to figuring out how to really message, psilocybin in a way that voters and what I call soccer moms and grandparents could really understand. At the end of the day, those are demographics that if you can educate and help soccer moms and grandparents who vote at a very high percentage rate understand what psilocybin is, how it works, what are the risks and benefits, sometimes what it's not, like in Oregon, it's not retail sales, and who stands to benefit from having access. When we could answer those simple questions, we saw a lot of support. We started with 41% support in Oregon for Measure 109. Most campaigns don't move forward after they see that kind of polling. But we saw when we could provide answers in a short amount of time to those questions, a huge swing was starting to happen with a little bit of education. We ended up winning that campaign with 56%, which was pretty amazing. And so from there, after passing Measure 109, we very quickly realized, okay, we need to set up an organization that can hold the responsibility of implementing this law. So within the law, it allows for a 2-year implementation period to really figure out, okay, we have the skeleton of the law and the statute. Now we need to fill everything in. We need to figure out what types of licensing requirements are going to be, what do service centers look like, what does care look like, et cetera, all of these things. And we gave ourselves 2 years to do it. And I'm really proud to say that now that the program has been up and running for 2 years or so, over 10,000 people have been through that program.
Wow.
And that is historic. That has shown that we've proven our ability to create state-based access that is legal, safe, effective, and most importantly, at the time that we were mostly feared about, is we have not attracted federal intervention as a result, because we've centered safety and efficacy throughout the entire program. And so that was my work as it related to Oregon. And I'm on to focusing on national landscape now and really sharing the lessons learned from both Oregon and Colorado. We got a lot of things right. These programs are working, but there are some big challenges ahead of us to really make these programs sustainable, scalable, and most importantly, affordable for everyone who stands to benefit.
Thank you for that. That is an incredible accomplishment. Really cool to think that 10,000 people. Do you collect a lot of data, or does Oregon collect a lot of data on the experiences that these people are having that can really contribute to the body of knowledge and help other states?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a good question, because initially the measure itself contained no data collection mechanism at all. And so 3 years ago, I actually spearheaded a new piece of legislation in the Oregon legislature called Senate Bill 303. The entire purpose was to set up a bare minimum baseline amount of data collection that would essentially tell us how many people are coming through the program, why are they seeking services, how many doses are they receiving, Are they coming in for more and additional sessions? Where are they coming from? Are they Oregonians? Are they from out of state, right? And what's their socioeconomic background? Just to get a picture of baseline data, right? This is not rigorous clinical trial outcome data that we've gotten yet, but it has provided a really solid foundation to learn what's working and what's not working with the program. And what's working is that people are getting access. And what we're seeing is the challenge that is our new opportunity is that the majority of those 10,000 people who have been through the program are coming from privileged economic backgrounds, which to those of us who have been doing this work for a while is not a surprise, right? This is the first ever program that got set up. We weren't going to hit a home run in the bottom of the first inning on this, right? It is a long path towards affordability. And so now I'm starting the Center for Psychedelic Policy, and our entire focus is on providing state decision makers and leaders and funders with strategies that can center affordability on day one, instead of setting up systems and thinking about affordability as an afterthought. We want to reverse that. We think whether you're in Oregon, we have an existing program, or you're in Idaho and you've never introduced a piece of legislation dealing with psychedelics, there are opportunities to center affordability at the beginning of those conversations so we can start to kind of apply those lessons learned in Oregon, Colorado, and we can start incentivizing funding for psychedelic healing and treatment right out of the gate.
So how'd you reach grandma in Oregon, and can that be used everywhere else?
That's a good question. I think grandma was specifically interested in hearing from the photogenic Navy SEALs who have been through this type of healing before and were very honest and vulnerable about their experiences, right? I mean, a lot of, especially like white men, are not comfortable being vulnerable, and you can imagine how military personnel, especially Navy SEALs, may not be either, right? But we found a Navy SEAL who was a local Oregonian who was willing to share his story and willing to talk about, his struggles with addiction and suicidality in a way that really helped people see that we're not actually talking about like a drug or psilocybin. We're talking about a new mental health care treatment for folks. And when we can switch that and really talk about the fact that we all know someone who stands to benefit, right? Maybe it's not for us, but we all know someone who is on SSRIs but would like to get off, or has been dealing with PTSD but hasn't found a good remedy, right? Psilocybin is not for everyone, and we're very upfront about that, but it can be a very powerful tool in the toolbox for behavioral health. And we believe that was one of the more powerful messages with grandmas specifically that resonated, was the veteran angle.
So around the country, there have been successes and failures. Even the failures can be viewed as steps forward and learning experiences. But especially the Northeast, we've had some disheartening defeats. We're from Maine, and Maine just had a bill that was like so close. It looked like it was going to pass. It was such a simple bill, and it didn't. And I would love to hear your understanding of Maine's landscape and what's going on there, and where you think the real frontiers, like where the next state, which state is going to be next?
Sure. Yeah, so these are great questions. This is exactly why I just finished producing a report called the National Psychedelic Landscape Assessment. Oregon, Colorado had passed. Massachusetts attempted to pass a ballot measure, but that fell short. That was around the same time that unfortunately MDMA was rejected at the FDA level. And there's a lot of questions in the movement asking, like, did we just run into a wall? Like, do we have to start over? Or were these bumps in the road? And my opinion was these were bumps in the road. And I knew that there was a lot of activity happening, not so much in the ballot measure vehicle or lane anymore, but at the legislative level. And I decided now is a really opportune moment to do a deep dive and look at all of the psychedelic related legislation that's been introduced over the last 5 years. And so some of those top lines are as follows. 38 states plus the District of Columbia have introduced well over 220 bills over the last 5 years dealing with psychedelics, right? And that ranges 9 different policy categories, from study committees and automatic rescheduling if the FDA does approve, which are considered kind of low lift, easy starting points, all the way to state-based pilot programs and the most recent historic example is New Mexico's Senate Bill 219, the first ever medical licensed and regulated access program to be passed by a legislature. And so the momentum hasn't gone away. It's simply shifted from a ballot measure lane, which is great because you get to define the entire program, like what you write is what you get, but it's very expensive. It costs us upwards of $6 million in Oregon to pass that campaign. Not everyone has $6 million laying around, right? Especially in today's kind of economic climate. And so the legislative pathway has its own hurdles too. The process is kind of tough to understand if you didn't grow up in a political world. Just navigating a legislature can be really complicated. And just figuring out how to really communicate what matters most to decision makers, right?
That actually leads me to ask, what is the opposition saying? What are their talking points? What data do they use when they come out against this? Yeah. Well, is it really just saying there's not enough research? Do they know what they're talking about when they say that? Or is it out of ignorance? Where are they coming from?
Yeah, I think it's a really common assumption that there is well-organized, well-funded opposition. There's not, is the truth. You might have an American Psychiatric Association submit a letter, but they're not organizing, they're not raising money, they're not going out of their way to try and stop this train that, in my opinion, can't be stopped. Like, the cat is out of the bag on psychedelics. It's just how far out can it run and will it grow up and have a good life becomes the question. And so it was much more about the trajectory of education, right? And one of the key gaps that I identified, there's several gaps that I identified across the country where, of those 220 bills, less than 40 of them have passed. And so why becomes the question. One of the main reasons, and there's several, one is you don't have, a lot of these efforts did not have clear, organized, trained champions, right? So there's two different types of champions when it comes to a legislative perspective. One is the kind of champions we think about: veterans, doctors, healthcare professionals, people with lived experience that can share how it impacted them and what it could mean for other people like them. But the one that's most oftenly overlooked as the champions that I think are often most powerful, most effective, are legislators themselves, right? We saw this in New Mexico. New Mexico is a textbook example of how to educate legislators that are introducing the bill and get them to be the first line of defense in convincing their colleagues that they have to work with on every single day. They have to work with those colleagues. And when they can share not only the data and the science, but their own emotional appeal as to why they support this and people that they know stand to benefit, that's a different ballgame that you're playing with there. And that doesn't mean that you're going to have 100% success, but it certainly helps a lot. And I think that's one strategy that I have yet to see really any other campaigns use. I mean, maybe 2 or 3 use that type of strategy. And so I think the champions and concise strategic messaging can go a really long way. And that's one of the gaps that I think can be filled as we continue to look at how can we put more W's on the board from a legislative perspective.
Does Maine have a champion?
I think Maine has had champions before, for sure. I mean, another gap that Maine had addressed is a lot of these efforts don't hire professional lobbyists, right? And that's not to say that you can't get it done without a professional lobbyist, but I don't know many advocates that are full-time advocates in the psychedelic space. They have day jobs. They probably don't understand the legislature. They're not in the Capitol every single day, like leveraging relationships and tracking things. And so, Maine definitely had a lobbyist, and I had the pleasure of going out there and actually supporting some of that work. I think, there's a lot of contexts that also aren't necessarily in the control of the psychedelic movement, right? There are all kinds of political environments, whether it be economic budget issues or other big fights, where psilocybin has to be, or psychedelic healing has to be introduced in a way that can transcend otherwise partisan politics, right? And I think that's actually one of the benefits that we're seeing right now is, we have bills that are being passed by, Republicans, right? And by like entire Republican parties, and the Democrats are late to the party. That's not what we had thought. That's not what it was for cannabis, right? And so there's differences here. And so I think that there's a lot of different strategies that really just need to meet the state where it's at. And there needs to be an analysis that is done, what is the political environment? What is the current mental health crisis in that state? What type of money is that state investing in current options? Where are they falling short? And how might psilocybin or psychedelic therapy and healing meet those efficacy rates, if not exceed them? In addition to the ability for psychedelic healing to be a cost benefit, right? Like to save the state money, where they're investing a certain amount of money in something, psilocybin can be done, at the same cost, if not less, with better outcomes. That's the type of language that I think if we can start to engage in those type of conversations, understanding what are the current priorities of every state has a behavioral health 2030 goal. All you have to do is go to their website and look at it. They flaunt it everywhere they go. If we can start to talk their language and show them that psychedelic healing could be a powerful tool in the toolbox to achieve those goals, I think we're going to build a lot more coalitions within government agencies, within the governor's office, with unsuspecting legislative champions. And once you start getting them excited and they want to be a champion, as opposed to a constituent called me and I'm going to introduce this bill, but I'm not really going to do anything. It's not a priority for me. We have to learn how to make it a priority for them. And we can, and we have. And there's blueprints to do it, and that's a lot of the work that I aim to do at the Center for Psychedelic Policy.
Thank you so much there. That is really important insight into what's going on in these states and what matters to legislators, how to get it all done. A little bit more on understanding Maine, I think would be really interesting for us. We're from Maine, for our community, and then just touching on what you think. I'm going to push you to give me a state that you think is going to really come through and do it in the next, year.
Yeah, so 2 questions. Really quickly on Maine, I think doing an assessment of what a strategic incremental approach looks like would be important, right? I think one of the natural missteps is states are looking at Oregon, they're like, well, let's just do the Oregon thing. That worked, and it did work, but that was a ballot measure. We had to convince voters to vote yes on that, right? In Maine, you have to convince the legislature, and there's all different types of priorities and politics that you have to navigate there. And so I think something that is a lower lift, like a pilot program that does not require all of the licensed and regulated infrastructure that we have in Oregon, pick certain high-need populations or certain conditions, start small, and ask for funding for treatment on day one, right? And measure those outcomes against current investments. That does primarily, one, gets money for treatment out of the gate, right? And if we see the results that I think that they would see, the legislature's going to want to continue to invest in that. And then we're on track. Then we're headed to the golden standard of care that's going to look different in every state. But I think we can all get there, no matter what state that people are in. Remind me of the second question.
So looking at, and it might be Maine, but what the state that you think is next up to really put in place some legislation on this front?
Yeah, I think Nevada is coming up pretty fast, right? A very purple state. There's a lot of Republican interest there. They are utilizing this type of pilot model specifically for veterans and first responders, right? Legislators can't say no to veteran or first responder faces when they show up and they ask them for something, right? It's really hard to do that, even strategically. And so when you figure out which populations have big sympathy points within certain legislative bodies, those are the people that you put up front, right? And it'll differ between state to state. But Nevada has shown a lot of really strategic thinking around the type of policy and thinking about that incremental step, right? Because a pilot program can grow. It could eventually turn into a larger program, but it does it in a way where it checks boxes out of the gate where we're still trying to check some of those in Oregon. We're not serving all of the highest need populations. We have yet to get funding from the state for treatment in Oregon. There's an argument to be made that this type of strategy and model could actually allow states like Nevada or Maine to bypass Oregon in certain ways and to get funding for treatment before we've done it, even though we've been up and running for several years longer than other states. So that's really where I think this type of strategy of pilot programs and incrementalism can truly apply to any state in the country. It just requires a strategic analysis of what's happening on the ground, what's politically viable, and what do we need to do to get there.
Thank you so much, Sam, for helping us understand what's actually happening out there. It changes so much and so fast, and it not knowing makes a lot of people afraid.
Sure.
And they don't know how they can help. And they don't know how to advocate for these things that they might care about. So continue doing that work and spreading the message. You've been very clear, and I know that our audience is really going to benefit from it. So Sam Chapman, Center for Psychedelic Policy, North Spore appreciates you, man.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the work you guys are doing too. And if there's anyone out there that wants to talk about detailed strategy and doing analysis of where a state's at, don't hesitate to reach out. You can contact us at cppolicy.org, sam@cppolicy.org. We're still building this organization, but we're ready to get out in the field and help people where they're at.